Some background on the title. My dreams rely on me is a phrase I heard, and it's been stuck in my head ever since. To start this episode, I want you to reflect on the following question. What makes going for your dreams the most satisfying for you? Do you like just the outcome, or do you feel energized by the act of trying regardless of how hard, how long, how time consuming it may be? In your past experiences, what has been the most foundational things that allowed your dreams to become a reality? And if there's a common point, regardless of the area of life that the goal is for. While you take some time to think about it, let me introduce myself. Hi, my name is Elijah, but you can call me Lay. Welcome back to A Little Atypical, a space for deep feelers and unconventional thinkers navigating wellness, personal development, and lifestyle with a little more nuance. I'm here to bring fresh energy to the beauty, wellness, and personal development space by having the curiosity to dig beneath the surface. I like to talk about typical topics from a not so typical perspective, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. So it's been a while since I had a yap session. It is currently like 5:41 in the morning. And this was always kind of the plan to do an episode like this. But truthfully, I did not know how I wanted to execute anything until June happened. It is July 31st as I'm recording this. Yes, it's a little early, but I am trying to work ahead because my future self will thank me for it. I'm just going to say that. If you're new here, this podcast covers lifestyle and, more importantly, lifestyle design. When I was working on planning this episode, I actually went with my friend to the beach to do a photo shoot for her because she is on a mission and I have cameras. And it was definitely a catch-up session, but we also talked about what content we watched growing up. The conversation came up because I asked her what blush she was wearing, and I think she said it was like Juvia's because she gets makeup from someone who is friends with a MUA creator. So, given the context of my academic background, she was like, "Have you ever watched that person?" And I said no, because even though I enjoy makeup, especially in high school, and of course, like, it was just so fun creating looks in the time of the 2010s. There was never a non-beat face back then. But honestly, I didn't enjoy necessarily watching makeup content creators or knew many of them by name. My favorite looks were not everyday looks, but lead more into the people creating art on their face and doing like themed makeup looks. Obviously, I am a girl who loves themes and concepts. Anyways, I told her my primary content was lifestyle. So think Alicia Marie, Remy Cruz, My Life with Ava. And I eventually listened to, pretty basic and unsolicited advice as my main podcast during my time in college. And then I think later in my college years, 2021, 2022, what I liked was pretty much like Linda Sun on YouTube, The Wellness Cafe with Trinity Tondelier, Alicia Gogan, the formerly Just Glow With It podcast. Now it's called, I think, See You Sunday. And then in that odd transition from college student to, being young adult trying to figure out post-grad life, it was then like Tam Carr, Haley Gamba, and Lena Lifts. And of course, through all these years, I had, my go-to channels for like workouts to follow. And now I watch a few different people as well to keep me on track with my main goals. All this to say, even though I did bring up lifestyle creators and why I think society's view on them shifted for them specifically, I believe it was, episode 74. If you haven't listened to it, that actually is one of my favorite episodes I created this year. Honestly, I just think the conversation with my friend made me heavily reflect on what I gravitate to and why. Even though I am interested in makeup, beauty, and all the things I went to school for, to me, it's more of an aspect. So when I look for content, it really is about what are my main goals at the moment. And I am very selective in that sense. So getting back to the topic, it's clear everyone's dream on some level depends on them. And for some people, it's about gaining awareness of what they truly want. For others, it may be just gaining the confidence to stand in who they desire to be. And for many, it is about looking for ways to support themselves while pursuing their dreams and not getting lost in all the noise. July has been a big month in the sense of thinking of realignment, because even though I am proud of myself for certain aspects of my 2026 so far, which I'll get into, something I've been feeling in my approach, it's been a bit too soft for what I need in the moment. I feel like I go through phases of wanting things to be gentle and giving myself grace and taking the day slowly, and other times I have a solid structure that makes me feel like I am truly progressing in life, but then I burn out. So it's like swinging back and forth. And then I realized it was because at some point, subconsciously, those things became contradictory. I didn't realize I was feeling that way until I started the book Lilith by Nikki Mamery, although I may not finish it, but that's besides the point. This is not necessarily a spoiler, but how the first chapter was set up was to show a contrast of how Lilith operated in Eden as opposed to Adam. I don't know if that describes it well, but since it is a modern retelling, the beginning of the book just made me think about how at one point of the internet, right, there was so much conversation about soft lives, pink collar jobs, feminine energy versus masculine energy, etc. There was just so much word pollution that was going on that I found myself overstimulated and overwhelmed. I'm not saying desiring those things are bad if you do. I just think that they are ideas repackaged to make it digestible and or feel shiny and new to capture people's interest. But that is a different topic, if I'm being honest. For a while, it was like, for many things, it felt like it's this or that. But I started to feel like, why can't it be this and that? Not in a all or nothing way, but just adjust the percentage I give and understand that it's rare that it would be a perfect 50-50, is what I'm saying. Because I don't know if I talked about this on here or if it was a YouTube video, but essentially about how balance could lead to perfectionism, and how it's funny to me, like Libras, they're literally between like Virgos and Scorpios, but people don't think they are as in depth as they actually are. So, with all that being said, I'm just going to recap the first 6 months of the year just to give you guys an idea of the experience I was going through. Originally, I wanted to talk more in depth about what I learned about building the life of dreams and like going for your dreams explicitly, but I think I'm going to save that aspect for next week. And I am going to share questions I have been asking myself in a sense to change direction. Because when you're quote unquote building your dream life, it sounds so cute and cinematic and, you know, like just being in a movie. But in real life, it's more like you're in your kitchen, you're in your notes app, you're on your hot. Can I say it still? I don't know. They trademarked the term. So I'm going to go with Wellness Girl Walk because of the trademark wars going on. Sometimes you're, crying on a random Tuesday. Then somehow you just keep going through it all, the highs and the lows. And that's just what I want to talk about today. Starting off in January. January felt like me restarting, but without extreme pressure, if that makes sense. Honestly, it was because I've been preparing since November for this new year, for the content I wanted to make and the way I wanted to show up. One thing I really didn't want to do this year is rush to reinvent myself. I already had a plan, people I wanted to connect with, webinars to attend, little systems I wanted to keep up with so that I could come into the year calm instead of with desperate energy, so I could truly just be consistent. One thing I will say is I was cooking at home most of the time. That is something that carried on from, November, December. Like, once it was Thanksgiving, I was just in a cooking era. And honestly, when I got into this new year, it just did not stop. It's just so funny because from the outside, I know it doesn't sound like a big deal. But for me, it was everything. I think it is something so important to my journey right now because I've been on this health journey and it's been a long while that I was trying to lose weight for the purposes. I've explained my reasoning many, many times, but I've been on this journey since like 2022. But it took me until November 2023 to really lock in when my contract role ended. And at that point of time, I was already my heaviest at around 170. Since 2021, it's just been me yo-yoing between throughout the 160s, if I'm being honest. And look, 170 isn't a morally bad number, just to put that out there. But when you're 5 foot nothing, rounded up by the way, it just feels different than if I was like 5 feet 4 inches and above. Even being 5'3" at this point might make a difference in my case. But I was in a lot of pain. So throughout 2024, I was on the journey, and then I hit my initial goal because I decided to break down. My goal was for myself. So I hit my initial first goal around February 2025. Then I had to take some time to heal my relationship with food because it was feeling unsustainable. And honestly, I think this is a very key aspect for anyone going on a health journey, whether part of their health is to gain weight or to lose weight or to maintain weight. It just really doesn't matter. I think this is very important regardless of your goals. But that is when I did gain a little weight back. So I was hovering around the mid/upper 150s, but I didn't gain back all the weight. Anyways, so January was me being like, okay, and reaffirming with myself, we're not doing extremes, we're being intentional. And I was walking a lot, actually. My step average for January was 18,614, which I know sounds like a crazy number, but I literally challenged myself in December to average at 20,000 steps. So it wasn't my highest, but it was me kind of coming down from that challenge and just averaging out. And also the meals that I was cooking, like getting back to food, was so good. Like, I had like this soup, and I don't know what was with me because if you know me in real life, I disliked soup for the longest time. Like, all my friends really liked ramen. I was just never a soup person, but I always just like, went along. But I made this beef cabbage soup. I also had like these other meals like honey jerk chicken with green beans and those mini rustic potatoes. I'm just really proud of how I was feeding myself. I loved the food I cooked. And then socially that month, and you are probably so sick of hearing this if you aren't new, but that was the month I joined a virtual book club, and I know I talked about this so often, but never in full detail. What's funny about this is the seed was kind of planted by a romance book I started back in April 2025. It was called The Elevator Pitch, and I'm going to talk more in the book, but in the book, the main character has her people that she found through book club, and the main character is an introvert. So she found her people through a book club, and the way the friendships were explained and described made something click for me, because I realized I didn't just want more friends, because I know a lot of times in your 20s, especially in the post-grad era, sometimes you're like, dang, people move away, or you move away, or because you're not in an environment that's consistent, it's like, wow. Or you just kind of start just accepting just being in that environment. So you don't open yourself up for other types of friends. So you just stick with, for example, the people you know at work or something. But I didn't want friends in that vague sense. I wanted a hobby-based social circle, because the past 3 years have been rough. And for whatever reason, the beginning of a new decade in my life tends to feel especially isolating. For instance, when I was, 10, near 11 years old, since I have a late birthday, everything shifted for me socially. I mean, I feel like most people experience being in a new environment, but in my case, being the minority for the first time in school and becoming aware of race in a way I haven't been before, that was just something different. And that form of isolation stretched from about 11 to 14/15. Being 24 now, turning 25 literally in a few months, has been its own version of that same isolation, because 21 was when I graduated college. So adjusting to adulthood socially has been a lot more effort than I'm used to giving, alongside with trying to figure out what I truly wanted without access to guidance. I'm just really hoping 25 is a turning point, because I haven't given up on myself, clearly, even in the most difficult seasons, and I want that to count for something. I think anyone would. But anyways, so joining the book club was me intentionally choosing balance, because I do love my solitude. I'm not gonna lie about that. But I also want community instead of just accepting whatever because of my environment. And yes, a book club is about, the books, but I was going to read anyways, because reading is a habit that is important to me. This just gave me people to engage with while I did what I was already gonna do. And the books I read in January really did set the tone for how I wanted 2026 to feel, between balancing things like pleasure and depth and personal growth. First book on this list, Elevator Pitch, and even though, yes, I know I technically said I started this book in April 2025, but I did not finish it before the year started, and I finished it on New Year's Day. So I am counting it as a 2026 read. I really enjoyed the relationship dynamics they explored in this book. There were really sweet moments, but it also had, a little spice. So I don't want to mislead anyone. If you're looking for a romance with a strong external storyline, it really wasn't that. It felt more focused on personality, trauma, showing up in relationships, dynamics with friends and family, and how to communicate when you're building a relationship that has agreements to it, like her bucket list and him helping her fulfill it. Before I carry on, though, I wanted to share my unpopular bookish opinion. So, a lot of people hate certain genres because they keep trying to read them from the perspective of what they're used to. So, like, if you normally read like sci-fi or historical fiction, especially without, any romance in it, you're used to stories centering societal themes, and romance as a genre just has a different focal point. To me, it's a little more about the individualistic experience with engaging with other people, the internal worlds. Yes, societal themes are a part of it, but not centered the same way. And something that always like irks me when it comes to the reading community is when people say read classics instead of those trash books. Because, like, okay, yes, classics can be complex and less straightforward, not to mention the vocabulary expansion used in those books. So your brain is doing different work, and I can acknowledge that. But a lot of people also read for representation and for topics that classics don't always provide because the topics are taboo. How many classics are speaking really explicitly? And I say explicitly, keyword, because I know that sometimes certain books do have an undertone, but I digress. Explicitly on topics like anxiety, ADHD, depression, queerness, or even told from the perspective of people of color. And I'm not saying they never are, because clearly, depending on the author, they will try to include more of their experience. But when classical books are recommended, most of the time, people aren't talking about a diverse group. Most of the time, they are referring to very specific authors as classics, and whether it's like Russian literature or French literature or white American authors. And that's the other thing. Like, people scream, read classics, but I rarely see people, if ever, recommend classics from African Americans, Caribbean, Latin Americans, South Asians, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Arabic authors. It will be literally American authors that rarely do include people of color, by the way, even though they are American too. French classics, Russian classics, and that's it. Rant over. Back to the books. So, the second book, which was a book club read, was Aquaviva, and I rated it approximately a 3 from what I remember, and I still feel like it could have been a wrong time type read because it was very spiritual and abstract. And I could tell I was struggling with the writing because it wasn't the type of book I was used to reading. Because it was kind of like an expression of being a stream of consciousness. You didn't really know anything about the narrator. It was just exploring their mind. And maybe some people will enjoy that. I'm just not used to that explicit writing style. So maybe if I read more books with that writing style, I can grow comfortable with it. But anyways, the next book was called like Food Intelligence. This was my non-fiction pick because I was in my, of course, like wanting to learn nutrition era. The history and the research in this book was fascinating, but at times it felt like an extended argumentative essay. And I didn't fully agree with the framing. especially where it leaned too hard into we're completely helpless narrative, because at the same time, yes, the food industry is an issue. Access to food is a huge issue. Food being highly engineered to be hyper palatable is its own issue. Not to mention the intentionality of the placements of certain food chains. But they also, in a sense, I feel, downplayed individual autonomy, even though, yes, there is so much of it that is a collective effort. But I just didn't agree with their downplaying. Another book club read was The Master and Margarita, and this was an intense book, and I wouldn't recommend it to someone who is new to, for example, reading for fun or new to classics. In my opinion, part one felt kind of overwhelming. Like, it is very like big picture focused and a lot going on, but part two felt more like a relief because it focused more on the primary characters. It made me think about overall, moral grayness, good versus evil, and the treatment of writers. And it honestly feels like a book I need to reread eventually because I want to have a different experience with it. Overall, January was really about effort to grow, which is why I chose it as, the theme of the month for the podcast episodes. And of course, another aspect was changing my relationship with guilt because guilt creates blockages. Examples of effort that month for me was the mentorship program I applied for, I was accepted into. And besides that, I was, as I mentioned, attending webinars, sending messages on LinkedIn, like cold messaging, and content-wise, for personal ambition purposes, I pushed myself and I had about 7 podcast episodes that month. Like, I was on it for real, y'all. I was on it for real. But the biggest shift, like as I was saying, was how I moved through guilt. Some examples include I stopped denying myself rest during the day. I adjusted my approach to strength training instead of being all or nothing about it and taking on more than what I could have handled at that moment. And also, when a family member visited and kept asking me questions that triggered me, I didn't crash out or ruminate on it like I used to. I used to feel so frustrated because despite all I was doing behind the scenes, the effort I was making to make changes, they spoke about me like I never did anything or enough. And that also added to me denying myself rest and feeling like I have to rush with my health journey as proof I am actually waking up and doing things. Moving on to February, which honestly, there's not a lot to report. February, nothing crazy happened. I started working with my mentor and settling into my approaches to make this year different for myself. The month felt plain, but sometimes plain is exactly what you need when you've been, in a very hectic month. And the fact it was plain was actually a good thing because February is usually when I start to experience burnout or seasonal depression. But this time I felt okay enough to stay consistent with the mundane. My steps were lower, 12,625 as my average. And honestly, lowering them was a smart decision. It helped me stay consistent without burning out. And the food this month was also very simple. I had burger bowls, a chicken sausage, cabbage, pasta, and cottage cheese sauce. Basically, I kept repeating ingredients, but I switched up the flavors, which made it easy to stay home and not fall into the habit of eating out. And I think what made February feel like the maintenance was really good and really calm. In general, a lot of things were being reinforced. When my meals were easy and predictable, my brain had more room for other things I used to, stay steady, like what I read, what I watched, the stories I let sink into myself. So for the reads of February, I read Picking Daisies on a Sunday. This was a book I wanted to read for the longest time because I loved the cover, and I'm not going to lie about that. Reading it, I found the writing structure to be overly simplified. I still gave it a 4 though, not because it was a monumental story, but I felt like I connected a lot with the main character to a point it was like a bit scary. Now, would I recommend this book? Maybe, if the person isn't a snob about writing styles, likes to have more entertainment type books, wants something that reflects on the topic of grief, etc. However, the high rating is not because I'll consider it a good book. It just felt nostalgic to me in a sense. It was very cute at times, but the other times it was very irritating. Next book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. I was very close to giving it a 5-star, but the last third of the book got on my nerves, especially Miss Turner and the way, Native Americans were dismissed a bit in that book. I get that it reflected a time period, but it still irritated me. Rereading it, since I barely remembered high school me reading it, hit so different at the age I am at now. I connected more to the self-discovery place, and I could see way clearer how each relationship, from her nanny to the different kinds of love she experienced, shaped her path. In general, it brought new thoughts for myself and great conversations during book club because everyone seemed more engaged compared to other book club picks from January. Next, another reread, I reread Year of Yes, which was a very fun thing to do. It was, I think, 10th anniversary that came out, so I was just rereading it because I had the original, but this one had updates that included things like the pandemic. So other than that, the book was basically the same, and I gave it 5 stars again because I initially gave it 5 stars. And then other content I consumed for the month, I watched Avatar. Funny because I never watched it as a kid, and it was one of my ex's favorite shows. I started watching it with him my senior year of high school, but we didn't finish it. I think my book club was talking about it and I felt left out, so I wanted to watch it. And even then, I don't think I finished it because I wanted to do a Fruit Basket rewatch for the Lunar New Year. But both made me think so much about growth, development, upbringing, and a sense of community and people coming to you and found family. Okay, so I'm back from a quick little break and I'm realizing this episode to do the entire 6 months might be a lot longer than I thought, so I'm just gonna wrap up with March and then instead do a part 2 to this episode. March was when things started speeding back up again physically because I was just taking care of myself, managed a daily step average of around 14,769, but mentally it was just a different story going on. I was interviewing more for my career, but I still wasn't where I wanted to be. And so I was getting in my head a lot, and this is where fate comes in. I talked about this, I think, since, was it 2024 or 2025? Either of those years, I talked a lot about how fate has a lot to do with trust. And I'm going to be honest, it started to waver this year. I just feel like Pisces season, my beliefs are a key topic, and so are my dreams. So I pay extra attention to those things. And I was just having such strange dreams during that time. There were grim moments when I would catch myself missing my ex. It was just a very emotional month. But I think a lot of what I was feeling emotionally came down to me reflecting on my life again through the lens of womanhood, community, love, and worth. And honestly, the content I was consuming definitely fed into what I was spiraling and in terms like dreaming about and thinking about often. So, books I read that month, the first one I wanted to list was Parable of the Sower. I wasn't sure how I would initially rate this when I read it because sci-fi wasn't a genre I was really into or naturally reached for, but it was still fascinating to read a book published in, I think it was like 1993, that imagined the years 2024 through 2027. And since it's 2026 now, part of the experience felt like a small game of comparing the story's, future to the world we're living in. More than anything, it had me thinking about community, belief systems, and survival. Like what it means to actually build community and not just be all talk and no show. What it is like to truly be a member of community and what values a community would even need to hold together when everything is unsustainable. And honestly, I feel like that's a topic that many people could relate to because in a time that feels very uncertain and people are struggling with uncertainty, whether it's through the lens of like uncertainty with connections, uncertainty financially, uncertainty with how are you going to remain healthy if you're struggling with the source of income. And it's just a very uncertain time. Actually, to add on to that, an uncertain time of what foods are even safe to eat. But I digress. I didn't really feel emotional about the book, but it definitely stayed in my head, and I found myself asking questions like internally. If I were to build a community, what values would it be based on? How would I want it to function? And realistically, do I have any real survival skills if an emergency ever happened? That book gave me a lot to think about with myself and with my skill set because obviously I do see myself as having skills, but my skills are mainly in the lens of creativity, the lens of just curiosity, I suppose. I have skills, writing skills, creative skills, analytical skills, but I don't necessarily know what survival skills I've actually have because I've never been to a point of needing that, and it's not like I've challenged myself in this lifetime like going camping or hiking or anything like that. It's not because I didn't want to go, but I just never grew up with the sense of the outdoors. And if I've had people to go with me that actually knows that stuff better, I think I would be excited to learn those type of skills. But I do think I in general should maybe learn like first aid or something, or at least how to identify plants, so I don't like accidentally eat something poisonous. But anyways, another book I read that month was The Duke and I, and I rated this book a 4, and it was just such a fun read, especially since I've already watched Bridgerton. I really enjoyed it, though the scene when he was drunk made me uncomfortable, and I hated how long he kept her waiting like after that fight. And it still had me thinking about romance, companionship, and the kind of love dynamics I actually want, because the story really highlights how waiting, miscommunication, and pride can really shape a relationship. And one thing I liked even more in the book than the show was their banter. I thought the garden scene worked better within the book, and in the show it felt mostly intense, but in the book it made more sense to me why Anthony was ready to duel Simon. When I read this, I instantly wanted to rewatch season 1 and pay closer attention to all the changes made just to see whether they improved the story or not. Next book, like I said, it was a month of me exploring my beliefs again. So I finally did the thing and I read Eat, Pray, Love. Like a lot of people, I did find Eat, Pray, Love to be pretty, entitled and self-centered at times. And I definitely side-eye a couple of moments in the book, but there were still small gems of like relatability that stuck with me, especially when she talks about ruminating about her ex relationship and the guilt she felt about ending her marriage. Those parts of the book felt very emotionally raw, and obviously I was having my own emotional turmoil with things. I think that's why reading that, it did stick out to me more, and it brought up thoughts about breakups and guilt and spirituality and having to start over. Truthfully, I read it out of curiosity because of the references made in other media. I'm pretty sure Gilmore Girls referenced it before, and I also read her book Big Magic before. Granted, I did not love it the first time, but I tried again later, ended up rating it higher. So I just wanted to try the book. And overall, this book made me reflect on my connections with other people, and it rekindled my desire to build a consistent practice again, like with meditation. And it kind of fueled my thought pattern of I just really need to travel. Overall, back to the general sense of March, because I'm pretty sure that was the month I talked a lot about being a late bloomer. That, sometimes it's genuinely hard to feel like I'm fully an adult. And I think that does hold me back from romantic love and community, because I struggle to feel like I belong in those spaces even at my age when I don't have like the permanent thing I'm craving. That gap is mentally exhausting. I've wanted a solid full-time role for a long time because I am very used to getting very temporary positions, contract roles. Just by March, I was starting to feel more tired of the inconsistency, because it was a goal for me this year to want something more solid. But even still, March had me still getting by. Like, I was still obviously reading books, still had me trying, just with an underlying heaviness, I suppose. The funny thing is, people always tell me, oh, you seem so good, and it's harder for me to tell, like, you seem like you have things together, you're excited about things, and, like, yes, on the surface, because doing projects and working on things and still contributing to my life is how I keep going forward. But that doesn't mean like I don't feel things. I'm not saying I have depression, because I don't want to self diagnose, but if I feel emotional, if I feel this deep sadness, I would still be a high functioning person, in the sense of I will still get up, I will still work out if I need to, I will still try to contribute to my routines, try to better myself. But that does not mean I'm all good. The reality is, I just had so much practice in my lifetime about just coasting through your emotions and functioning despite what you feel, to keep going despite the emotions you feel. And I don't necessarily know if that's the healthiest thing. I mean, I guess it would be unhealthy if I pretended not to see those heavy emotions. But I do think if you're seeing your heavy emotions, acknowledging them, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't see it as, I guess, faking or performing. It's just, I guess, a coping mechanism to put work in things so heavily. But as long as that work doesn't replace the emotional work, I don't know if that's a bad thing, actually. But yeah, I think I'm gonna end off here, because this is already an hour long, and this is just quarter 1. And I don't know if anyone could relate to this, because since I don't have necessarily a plan on how to end this now, I think we can all relate to starting off so strong and having just high hopes, like this time it's gonna work, this time is gonna work. And it is different in the time, it's just not in the way you expected. And I do think a lot of times, especially after our quote unquote quarter one of working through our goals for those 3 months, I feel like sometimes it does have like a disappointment to it if it's not exactly what you wanted, exactly what you expected. But I think it's very important for us in general to still acknowledge the good parts of it. And something I could say that is a big takeaway from quarter one is that ability to know, yes, planning is important, but it doesn't necessarily mean that things will fall exactly in the way you want it to. But that doesn't make it a bad time because you've done everything in your constraint to follow through because of that plan, and in a lot of ways you did follow through. Something that quarter taught me is that the need to just follow through without certainty. But I am not going to go too deep into that because I am compiling all of my lessons. I really just want to sit with them a bit longer before I turn it into a podcast episode, because I really want it to be something not just for me. Like, obviously, I am reflecting back on my life, but being able to turn that into something and to see it, the depth into it. So, yeah. I hope you enjoyed this part of the episode. I am sorry, I had the full intention of just doing the entire 6 months, but I guess now I have to work around my schedule, like my original schedule post, because I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting this to be that long. But until next time, have a good day, evening, or night. Sorry, there is no card pull in this episode because I initially planned it for the entire thing, but regardless, I hope y'all are having a great summer. I can't wait to chat more and give more updates, give more vibes, I guess. But until then, I will be working on a little project that I am excited to eventually get to explaining. And most likely still Substack. If you don't know, just follow me on there. And all these other little personal goals. And of course, working on my space too, because that's a big goal for me. But if you want, if you're listening on Substack or YouTube, comment down what are you doing this time of year to really reset yourself. Thank you for hanging out with me, and remember, until next time, have a good day, evening, or night, and stay authentically atypical. Okay, bye.